During the centuries that saw the enslavement of millions of black Africans in America and Europe, slavery was a system built on violence and domination, where enslaved individuals were treated as property rather than as human beings. While history often focuses on the abuse perpetrated by white men against enslaved people, a lesser explored aspect is the abuse suffered by black male slaves at the hands of white women. This facet of slavery is rarely discussed, but it holds significant importance in understanding the social and political dynamics that shaped that era. The role of white women in the slave system. White women were an integral part of this exploitative system. While they were perceived as delicate beings in the prevailing culture, they wielded immense authority over enslaved individuals within their households. Often, white women managed enslaved workers directly, especially when their husbands or fathers were absent. This arrangement gave them the opportunity to exercise power over enslaved men in various ways, including physical and psychological abuse. Physical and psychological abuse. The abuse inflicted on enslaved black men by white women took many forms. They endured harsh labor and cruel treatment from these women. In some cases, there was also the unspoken issue of sexual abuse. Relationships between white women and enslaved black men were always steeped in power imbalances, where enslaved men were forced to submit to the desires of white women under threats of violence, sale, or even death. Many stories and testimonies that have reached us today reveal that some white women used their positions to coerce and sexually exploit enslaved men. These coercive relationships often occurred in secret, as enslaved men were compelled to comply out of fear of severe consequences for refusal. Because white women held a significantly higher social status, the voices of the enslaved were completely silenced in such situations. Sexual abuse, an untold story. One of the most harrowing aspects of these imbalanced relationships is the issue of sexual abuse. While society viewed white women as pure and incapable of such actions, the reality was vastly different. Enslaved black men were treated as tools to satisfy sexual desires, unable to refuse such relationships. These practices not only degraded the dignity of the enslaved, but also deepened the psychological wounds inflicted by the institution of slavery. Among the most impactful testimonies shedding light on this hidden truth is the memoir of Harriet Ann Jacobs, which discusses the lives of enslaved individuals and the sexual exploitation they faced, both male and female. Her writings expose the hidden face of slavery, where white women were complicit in this exploitation, albeit in ways different from white men. Psychological and emotional impact. The psychological and emotional effects of these abuses were profound. Enslaved men were not only physically oppressed, but were also stripped of their humanity. They lived in constant fear and anxiety of punishment or retaliation if they did not comply with the desires of white women. This situation created a state of psychological torment that significantly affected the mental and emotional well-being of enslaved individuals. Erasure of history and ignoring the suffering. With the abolition of slavery, much of this history was erased. For various reasons, society tended to focus on the abuses perpetrated by white men and ignored the role of white women in this exploitation. Perhaps this is due to the stereotypes of that era, which portrayed white women as weak and incapable of violence, a perception that does not align with reality. However, the truth is that women were an integral part of this system, and just as men contributed to the oppression, women also played a role in the exploitation and abuse. The end of slavery and the beginning of liberation. With the end of slavery, liberation movements began to demand justice and equity. Although many of these abuses were not adequately discussed in the following decades, the growing awareness of slavery's history today is reevaluating the role of all participants in this oppressive system. Conclusion. The history of slavery is filled with shocking and horrifying stories, but it is also full of lessons we must learn. The abuse suffered by black male slaves at the hands of white women is not just a story of the past, it is a constant reminder of the need for a deep understanding of history and its complexities. We must learn from these stories to be more conscious and humane in our approach to the past and the present. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section and stay tuned for more comprehensive content on the mistreatment of enslaved black men during the pre-Civil War era. It has been an incredible experience having you with us throughout this segment of the video. Don't forget to support us by liking this,